The more clarity you have, the more powerful your goals are. Robert G. Allen. Today's episode hits on so many topics, one being how huge world events can change our lives in an instant, shaking us awake and making us reevaluate what is important and what our true purpose is in life. Welcome to the Stitched for Success podcast, where we are teaching business and life lessons that will help you launch, grow, or scale your creative business. I am Monica Allen, and I'm a wife, mom, daughter, entrepreneur, author, friend, lifelong learner, and host of this podcast. For over 8 years, I was stuck in corporate and dreamt of escaping. Creating a side hustle with just $700 and having taken the leap over 15 years ago, we have since grown multiple six-figure and seven-figure brands. Being an entrepreneur for over 18 years has afforded me many successes and a few failures. I want to share those with you so you can grow and be successful in your business. This podcast episode is brought to you by Zeus's Closet. We like to say we're like a tattoo shop for your clothes. We are currently offering a solopreneur package so you can get your own company gear. Save 20% off by simply using the promo code STITCHED. The link to the package is in the show notes. You are your biggest brand ambassador. Make sure you embrace it and show up wearing your logo so people remember and know who you are. My guest on this episode is a woman that I met on Clubhouse, and when I tell you that her energy is simply radiant and contagious, it is an understatement. It can simply be felt audibly over my AirPods. I can feel and sense her positive aura and the energy she exudes and wakes up with each day. I wanted to chat with Nina because she is helping entrepreneurs, more specifically mompreneurs, develop tools and strategies that help them lead a life of harmony while seamlessly balancing the challenges of business, life, and home. What entrepreneur doesn't need that? I know I can use that. Please take a listen to my interview with Nina Obier. She is the CEO and founder of Success Simplified and is known for being a business strategist and the original FUNness Facilitator. Nina Obier joins me today. Welcome to the Stitch for Success podcast, Nina.
Thank you for having me. I am excited about our conversation.
I am too. I'm so excited. So Nina, I know you've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years. Tell me about your transition from corporate into your own business.
Oh, what a loaded question, right? And 20 years would put me till about age 5. Ha ha ha. So what was the defining moment? I would say actually came, and I'm pausing for a moment because I felt like I could have done it at any moment, right? Can anybody relate to that? You have this feeling, you have this God within, this intuition saying, go do this thing. And if I'm being completely honest, back then, I don't know that I had the actual either clarity or the courage, probably more the courage or the confidence to just do it. So it was funny. It was kind of little by little. I was in the hotel industry for almost 10 years. My next step was going to be a general manager of a Hyatt hotel. And something didn't feel right. Kind of felt like, gosh, I was climbing up the wrong ladder, not just being in corporate, but just the wrong ladder, and something was out of sync. And so I feel like at that moment, I could have jumped over to entrepreneurship because I had an idea in mind. And I took a safe route, if I'm being completely honest. So the safe route was something I totally loved. So that was good, right? I got in alignment with something I totally love, which was training and development. And I went and worked with another major corporation, actually a pseudo government corporation, which was the Federal Reserve Bank.
Wow. Okay.
And now this girl knew nothing about even what that was. So for them to put me in a training and development position of an organization that I really didn't even understand what they did is another story all in itself. And so again, totally loved it, got to create things from scratch. I got several certifications in programs that were game changers and life changers back in the day. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, all the things. And then that nudge again, right? That nudge again. And the nudge came along with the 2x4 that many of us felt who were alive and kicking on September 11th, 2001. And so I had little girls, little babies. I'd say they were 6 and 4, I think, at the time. And that moment when that happened, and then those nudges that were nudging me earlier because I was starting to travel more. I was not there. I was not present. And then for something like that to happen, and then to know people involved, and then to have my husband sent there, it was just a whirlwind. And I really got clear that I no longer wanted to be away, be away from my kids. And so there was this little hobby I was doing, and I turned it into a business.
That is fantastic. And wow, 9/11 was definitely a defining moment for a lot of us. But that really, with you having young kids like that, I can imagine that shook your world a bit, especially when you're getting on planes to go somewhere away from them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And then, again, my husband's work was shifting. We had always both been kind of on call 24/7. So someone else was really helping us raise those babies. And so at that moment, I'm like, wait a minute. Is this what we really want for their future? Someone else to raise them, which I had amazing people in my life, but I wanted to be more a part of it. And I knew that I could have that yes and lifestyle if I put my mind to it.
Right. Now, what was this hobby that you turned into a business? Tell us about that.
So this hobby was scrapbooking. And there was this little company, not so little company, a home-based business, which I totally, totally am a fan of. So if you are in that type of business, I hear you, I see you. It provided so much for my family for a 13-year span.
Wow.
And I think what really got me, again, it was the combination of things, but that little hobby I was so passionate about it because leaving a legacy. So if you can tie those things in together, you've got September 11th, you've got what happened. And then, there's this opportunity to not only capture the moments. Of course, back then we were printing those photos,
Right.
But to write the stories that went along with it, to leave for your family and hopefully generations to come. I knew that I wanted everyone to have that gift. And so that's what I did. I went out, I had parties at my house. So many blessings came from it. And it wasn't always easy. We'll be completely honest about that too.
Right. Of course. As a matter of fact, I have a question about that. But before I jump to that question, you mentioned your husband had to go. Did he have to do something when it came to 9/11? What was his role?
So my husband he's retired. Thanks be to God, safely. He was in federal law enforcement, and he had a unique position where he, at the time, had just become a paramedic within that federal law enforcement. And so they needed people to go to Staten Island, and they had a makeshift care unit. I wouldn't call it a hospital. It wasn't that extreme. However, anyone and everyone who at that moment was helping out, all the different agencies that were helping out, if something were to happen or they needed something medically, they were brought there.
Wow. Okay.
So just that feeling of him being near there, not knowing, right? It was very early in the aftermath. So all of us, again, those of us who are alive and well, were like, okay, what kind of almost like, is another shoe going to drop? Right. So that really started. And I'm so glad I listened to my intuition at that point, because I could have ignored it after a few months, right? We get in our head, we become the people who block our truth so quickly with our thoughts. And I could have just remained comfortable. But I'm so glad I didn't, because he turned out to travel then for, yeah, again, so many stories for another day of how much he traveled and was out and went to all sorts of places. Again, that's why I'm so grateful he is safe and retired already now. When this airs, probably 2 years. We're almost going on 3.
Yay, that's so good. That's good. And you guys get to be together more.
Exactly.
Yes. And your girls are in their early 20s now?
They are. They are. My girls are in their early 20s. I have a 24-year-old and a 26-year-old.
Oh,
How is that possible? Because wait a minute. I only started to be an entrepreneur when I was 5. Okay.
wow. And you look very young. So,
Why, thank you. I'm very
yes.
proud of my age. I'm proud of how I, choose to take care of myself, and it's all good.
Yeah, you look great. You look great, Nina. So, you mentioned that, it wasn't always easy. Tell us about some of your biggest challenges when you first started your business.
Thank you for asking, because really in the early times, now I was this newly stay-at-home mom, right? There was this whole new world that had opened up, because I was literally in the hotel business 24/7, on a pager, which, yes, Google that if you don't know what that is. And then the other job that I had, I was starting to travel so much, right? So now here I'm at home. And so, for those of you who are starting out, and if you are at home, I wish someone had told me this. Leave the home stuff for at home. Like, when you have hours of work, like, have hours of work, right? And do the work. Whether the beds are made, whether the dishes are done, whether the toys are all over the place, because guess what? Those are just distractions to derail you from the decision you made to be a entrepreneur. And
Mm,
I would just have spurts, right? I would have spurts, and then I would go, well, you know what? Let me go do those dishes. Or, oh, you know what? Let me go do. Oh my gosh, the moment I let that go, either I did what I needed to do before my work hours started, work meaning an entrepreneur, right?
hmm
Or I just let it be. And guess what? My kids, we already said it, are 24 and 26 and seem to be well adjusted.
Good.
But yeah, in the early stages, it would definitely be, and I hear this even, even now I hear this, is when you're a new entrepreneur, is that new freedom.
hmm
And how much do you need to, I'll use the word again, be disciplined for all the things you do. That was another thing. It took years for me to realize I didn't need to compartmentalize my life either. So this is kind of what I started to learn. It was, this is Nina. This is her whole self. She is a mom. She is an entrepreneur. She's a wife. She's a daughter. She's a friend. She runs the booster club. She's on the PTA. And not to this is not to impress you. It's to impress upon you that I didn't, again, act a certain way when I was a mom, or act a certain way when I was an entrepreneur. When I found out, okay, I get to be me in all of those things, it truly just flowed better.
Mm, gotcha. But initially, when you started your first business, you really tried to juggle a lot at once instead of working on the business for, say, 7 hours or 8 hours versus, okay, now it's home time and I'm going to take care of home. I can totally
Absolutely.
relate to that.
Absolutely. And again, they're well adjusted. It all turned out well. I don't have any regrets, because you have to learn as you go.
Right.
However, help you so you don't have to learn your own lessons. That would definitely be a thing, and be okay with it, right?
hmm
And be okay with, that's the other thing. You said work on your business 7 or 8 hours. That was not going to be a thing for me, because I knew that I was to serve in other ways, right? So I started to learn better ways to be more effective and more efficient. I think that happens to us also. We're in such a doing mode versus, like, okay, who do I need to be today? in order to make sure all these things happen, right? And then so I was able to go back. Oh my gosh, I know we're like jumping around, but I was able to go back to what I had learned with the 7 habits of highly effective people. And that whole thing that everything is not urgent.
Right.
Everything is not urgent. You get to decide what are the important things. And I feel like sometimes we're like, oh, but it's these 20 things. It really isn't. It's really the next step that then gets you to do the next thing. And sometimes that next step, when you're really mindful and effective and efficient about it, it might take care of a handful of steps that you thought, right? But then those steps go away because you did the next right step. I don't know if that makes sense, but it does to me.
It makes sense. It makes sense. And so what number business are you on now?
I would say, like, in an official term, I'm on my second business.
Your second business. Okay.
Honesty is a big policy of mine. As I was transitioning out of Creative Memories, out of the scrapbooking business, I dabbled in a couple of other things because I was asked to. And this is what the coolest thing was. I'm glad I did it. And I'm glad I had grown so much from my Creative Memories business that I knew early on, like, yeah, this was not it. This was not feeding my soul. Like, I'd say financially, oh gosh, here's another lesson, right? Never chase the money. Okay, I'm sorry, I clapped. I probably shouldn't do that. Let me say that again. Never chase the money. Chase, to me, is not the right word. When you allow it to come to you. And so I feel like that business that I was approached, and it was like, oh, and they made me feel so good and appreciated for the experience I had. And they brought me in at a high level, right? These are all the wrong reasons to do another business, in this girl's humble opinion. Because it was just empty. It was empty. It was empty money. I was great at it. If I'm going to, we got to toot our own horn. I had fun, and yet it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. So I really don't count that one as a business, although I did it very successfully.
But you weren't passionate about it at all.
I would say, it was just an ends to a means to an ends. Is that right? It was a means to an ends, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Met some incredible people. And again, I'm glad that I collapsed time and energy, which is something I love to do with my clients and through my speaking engagements. It's like, all right, let's not have to go through all these lessons. Let's cut to what really works. And so that's when, now 7 years ago, I started what I consider my second business,
which is Success Simplified.
Yes, ma'am.
Nina and I spoke for quite a while and covered a variety of topics. She being an entrepreneur for over 20 years, Nina has a lot to talk about and a lot to share. This episode covered so many things, and I want to, or as I've mentioned before, I'd like to keep an episode of the podcast to around 30 minutes or less. And in order to do that today, I want to split the episode. So make sure you stay tuned for part 2 of my interview with Nina next week. If you were not impacted by 9/11, you have more than likely definitely been impacted by COVID. These types of life events have a way of waking us up, not wanting to put things off anymore. So one of the takeaways from this episode, as Nina mentioned, is to follow your intuition. If something is telling you to give it a shot, to try it, why not at least try so you don't have any regrets? Another takeaway is don't chase the money. And lastly, for this episode is everything is not urgent. Determine the next right step. And I think that's the key, is the word right. So make sure you come back next week when Nina and I talk about her second business. And we also get into talking about clarity, joy, mindset, habits, daily habits, and what are some game changers that we can make in our lives that will impact our business and our home. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm grateful that you took the time to listen. Please follow me on Instagram at Stitch for Success. You can also follow me on TikTok at the same handle. And if you need to email me, feel free to do so. It's simply stitchforsuccess@gmail.com. If you already subscribe to the podcast, thank you so much for being a supporter. If not, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and share the podcast. You can rate the podcast on Apple or on Audible. It really does help the podcast if you would rate it and subscribe. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great one.